everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another video where I review your DNA and genealogy questions. As always, if you have questions you would like me to answer in one of these videos, be sure to go to my subreddit, r/GenieVlogger, and post them there. Be sure to post sooner than later because I do have a massive queue of questions. This is why I have the subreddit, because I have so many questions always coming through my emails and my messages, and this is my best way to not only answer your questions, but then help the community at the same time, while also being able to make content because that takes up so much time. But let's jump into it. Ancestry DNA and Irish. My ancestry was reportedly 100% Irish, and the paper research and the vital and census records concur. My question is that my mother's parents were from County Cork, and my father's grandparents were from counties down. Paternal grandfather, Sligo paternal grandmother, and Tyrone maternal grandparents. The DNA map from Ancestry highlights Cork, Down, and Tyrone areas, but not County Sligo in the west. Bridget Benson Cassidy was my only great-grandmother, so I assumed it was because I am only a great-grandson. My late father's sisters, Bridget's granddaughters, tested and they have highlights from Down in Tyrone, but not Sligo. Do you think the hiccup is lack of Sligo residents in the Ancestry DNA pool? So my honest answer is I think you're expecting this to do way more than it's actually capable of doing. For one, there's a question of, is Ancestry even defining every single county in Ireland? I don't know. You would have to go and look what communities they're giving you, because they're giving you 100% Ireland and Scotland, but that's the DNA part. The rest of it, where it's saying Munster, Ireland, and then listing all the places, and Ulster, Ireland, and listing the places, those are the communities, and those ones are figured out through your DNA matches. And there's two things that could be going on. One, they just aren't defining Sligo as a county in Ancestry. I don't know if that's the case or not. The second thing is it is possible that there's just a lack of your relatives who are from Sligo who have done DNA testing and indicated that they are from Sligo, because the way that this works is it looks at your DNA matches, looks at all of the locations that they're putting in there, and then assigns specific locations to these different communities, so that when you're getting a lot of these specific locations coming up in your matches family trees, it is then giving you these communities. So this is unfortunately one of those questions where you're just being a little bit too nitpicky about Ancestry and expecting it to give you this full story of your entire ancestry, and it's just not going to do that. The fact that it gave you this much is more than what most people are going to get. But then another question is did your family just live in Sligo, or were they there for a long, long time? Because if your family, let's say you had a great-great-grandparent who, yeah, they were born in Sligo, but then you look at their ancestry and they were born in Sligo, but their parents were born in County Cork and had just moved to Sligo for a little bit, well then maybe you don't really have an in-depth ancestry in Sligo, you just have a connection, and maybe that's why it's not coming up. Honestly, I don't think that's the case. I think that's getting way too nitpicky to try to answer this question. I think it really is just coming down to that it's really just expecting a lot more from this than what it's really capable of doing at this point in time. On to the next one. Making use of DNA results with high endogamy. Hi, Genie Vlogger. Any tips for how to use DNA results effectively to support a family tree with lots of endogamy? Both my parents are from the same rural inland village in Portugal. To give you an idea of the endogamy levels, they share 230 centimorgans between them, according to 23andMe, and after me, their closest DNA matches are each other, then everyone else they match to. From paper trails and other DNA matches that I've managed to pinpoint on the tree, it doesn't seem as if there's any close NPEs that would yield this outcome, i.e. it really doesn't look like it's down to general high levels of endogamy in the village and surrounding villages. There is, of course, a lot of intermarrying as you go up the tree and degeneracy of ancestors, so ancestors frequently overlap between different branches. Now I'm going to stop reading there. Unfortunately, this person kind of put a little too much for a question. But to start in answering this, I'm actually going to change things a little bit. And technically, this is putting a question back to you. I don't need an answer. This is just for you to have as a question as you look into it. But is it actually endogamy that you're dealing with, or are you actually dealing with more recent and higher degrees of pedigree collapse? Now, I know endogamy gets thrown around a lot in the genetic genealogy world, and I probably say it in a lot of places where technically it may not fit quite as well. But the way to look at it is there's technically three possibilities going on where they're going to affect how you're matching different people. So the first thing is, with endogamy, you're talking about something where it's many generations of only certain people within a specific population group marrying only other people within that same population group. And that means for many generations, you're having a lot of instances within that community of both pedigree collapse and multiple cousin relationships. Pedigree collapse is when you have two relatives who are known relatives who then marry each other. In this case here, based on how much your parents are matching of 230 centimorgans, I'm guessing if you have a decently built out family tree, you have likely found common ancestors of both your mom and dad within not too many generations. So with pedigree collapse, it's called pedigree collapse because when you have cousins marrying, that means that their descendants are technically going to have less ancestors. So that means that if you have first cousins marrying, they're only going to have 3 sets of great-grandparents instead of 4. And then the other thing is having the multiple cousin relationships. And that just means when you are related to someone in multiple ways, with the double relationships, you don't have any of that pedigree collapse, you still have the same amount of ancestors. Perfect example of this is what's known as double first cousins. So that happens when you have, let's say, a pair of sisters, and then they meet a pair of brothers, and one sister marries one of those brothers, and then the other sister marries the other brother. Well, those children from both of those couples are known as double first cousins. And this is the most prime example of multiple relationships. So it's basically being related to someone through your mom's side and your dad's side. But with multiple cousin relationships, sometimes it can be even more than that, where you're related maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different times. So as an example, I actually have a cousin of mine, Steve Jaron, where we know we're related at least 3 different ways.
We're both 10th, 11th, and 12th cousins.
We might also have a 4th way that we figured out. I can't remember. But based on what you've been saying here, I'm kind of guessing that you may not be dealing with endogamy as much as dealing with high degrees of pedigree collapse in that community. Which technically, there is that question of where does it become endogamy and where does it stay as pedigree collapse. But I think with what you're dealing with your parents being over 200 centimorgans of shared DNA, that is very out of the ordinary from at least what I'm used to with endogamy. And even when dealing with Pacific Islander endogamy, which I've only done a little bit, but I've never really noticed parents being that closely related. Although when you're dealing with higher degrees of pedigree collapse versus endogamy, you're usually seeing large segments with pedigree collapse, whereas with endogamy, you're usually seeing a lot of small segments. So someone dealing with endogamy is probably going to look at a DNA match and maybe match, 150 centimorgans across 20 segments, whereas someone with high pedigree collapse may have 150 centimorgans shared, but the segments they share are like 15 centimorgans, 20 centimorgans, or larger, like actually significant sizes. Now, there are tricks with doing genetic genealogy research for endogamous populations. Changes a bit based on the population you're looking at, because the degrees of endogamy are different with each population. But basically, what you usually focus on is segments and trying to filter out those smaller segments. So when you are dealing with endogamy, it usually means that, yeah, you're going to have a higher amount of total shared centimorgans than you would usually expect, but it's made up of a bunch of small segments. So if you're doing genetic genealogy for an endogamous population and you're finding matches where they're having a lot of these small segments, but then you find a match where they don't really have as many small segments, then that match may be a bit more true to what you're going to expect. So that may be something that you're able to apply here, but if you are dealing with high degrees of pedigree collapse versus more of an endogamous type of a thing, then that is going to be really, really difficult, and it's really just going to come down to the paper trail, because if you have that deal, especially if both of your parents are related, that means that doing stuff like the Leeds method or the auto-clustering method becomes almost near impossible. Now, for endogamous populations, it's very hard to use those tools, but you still can. I'm really not sure if I answered any question here. I feel like I just kind of was talking mostly at you, but I do have videos about how to overcome endogamy. I'll probably link the card right here, so if you do want to look into that, check that out. On to the next one. My dad has no German DNA? I took a DNA test from Ancestry DNA a few months ago, and my dad did his a few weeks ago. I know I have a German grandpa, so I wasn't so surprised when my results came back as 31% England and Northwestern Europe, 25% Germanic Europe, 23% Ireland, 14% Scotland, 4% Wales, 3% Sweden, and Denmark. But then when my dad got his results, he came back as 50% England and Northwestern Europe, 23% Scotland, 14% Ireland, 10% Sweden and Denmark, 3% Wales. It makes no sense to me how it was able to pick up German and not my dad's. His dad is definitely his dad because I share a lot of similarities with my grandpa. According to Ancestry, I share 50% DNA with my dad, 3,489 centimorgans across 23 segments. Could the England and Northwestern Europe be partially German? My grandpa was from Baden-Württemberg, southwest Germany, and his family was clearly German. My dad has to have some German at least. Can you please try to explain me this? Now for this question, I actually thought it was answered quite well in the comments, so we're going to go into the comments to start out. So here we have a comment from Erdmina, and I hope I'm saying that right. You have to understand what German DNA means. We Germans in DNA are a mix of 6 European groups, and for Ancestry, the mix still changes with every update. The biggest DNA parts are Germanic Europe and Northwestern Europe, the smaller ones Denmark and Sweden, Eastern Europe, Baltics, Iceland, Wales, etc. Me as German without any recent history of migration among my ancestors, I have as much as 50% Germanic DNA. Then later down they say another thing. Hello, me again from Germany. The precision for ethnicity estimates for Germany as well as for Northwestern Europe and Ancestry is just about 60%. That is not very precise. What they're saying here is in reference to the precision and recall numbers that Ancestry releases. And what precision and recall is a statistical performance analysis of how well these work. I actually have a video about that. I'll probably put that in a card up here where you can check that out about what precision and recall mean more in depth. But it gives you an idea of how precisely it's actually reading it. And at 60%, that's not that great. So in a sense, what this is just telling you is that they have a difficult time figuring out when it is German ancestry, and often it's getting lumped in with other things, and there's going to be misreads. So people may get misreads of German just because of how difficult it is, and then people expecting German may get misreads of other things just because of how difficult it is. One thing I do find a little odd is that you are getting a 25% reading of Germanic Europe, but your dad isn't getting any. And what may actually be happening is, even though your father does have this known German ancestry, the DNA of his German ancestry may not be correlated so well with Germanic Europe, and thus he's getting a whole bunch of readings of other stuff. When you get your reading, your Germanic Europe isn't actually coming from your dad's side. The Germanic Europe reading may actually be coming from your mom's side. So it didn't seem like you mentioned your mom having tested, so it'd be interesting, if your mom tests, does she get German ancestry? Now, you didn't really mention all of what you were expecting for your family. You didn't talk about how much you know about all of your ancestry for your family. So it is possible too, maybe you have German ancestry that you don't know about on your mom's side, but maybe if you have traced out your family tree and you weren't expecting any German ancestry on your mom's side, it's also possible that there could just be difficulty in reading whatever her ancestry is, especially if she has, let's say, French ancestry, Dutch ancestry, Belgian ancestry, even Scandinavian, or maybe even Baltic or something like that. You're probably going to have some sort of connection to Germany, at least in the population group migration. And so really anything you can kind of be like, well, that could be a misread as Germany, that could be misread as German, that could be misread as German. So I just wanted to mention that in the sense of that while you're expecting that Germanic Europe you're getting to have come through your dad, it may not actually be coming through your dad, at least the segments of DNA they're reading on Ancestry as Germanic Europe. So a whole lot of different explanations going on here, but basically just shows how when you're looking at these DNA tests, they try to really, really simplify it so that consumers can easily digest it, but then it doesn't always match up and it doesn't make it so easily digestible. And that's when you have to get into this nitty gritty to really understand like, oh, well, it's not exactly saying what it's exactly saying. It's kind of more of like, it's about this and about that. So I hope that's helpful. On to the next one. I don't know if this is cheating because this is my own meme, but I just love this one too much. DNA test takers are always distracted with ethnicity percentages. DNA test takers, genetic matches, ethnicity percentages. And honestly, as I do more and more of these question reviews, it hits home even more, because half the time I honestly mean, like, I get it that you're worried that there's not this small percentage that you were expecting, but does it really matter when your paper trail, your DNA matches are already proving to you that it already is true? But hey, maybe that's me. My Puerto Rican results with European Jewish listed as a community. Could my high North African indicate Sephardic ancestry? So we have 3 photos here, and starting out, we have 26% Spain, 19% Portugal, 18% indigenous Puerto Rico, 7% Northern African, 5% England and Northwestern Europe, 4% Wales, 4% Basque, 3% Mali, 3% European Jewish, 2% France, 2% Nigerian, 2% Senegal, 2% Greece and Albania, 1% Cyprus, 1% Scotland, 1% Ireland, 1% indigenous Eastern South America. And then we have those communities with Puerto Rico, what we'd expect based on their results, especially that indigenous Puerto Rican, and then Jews in northeastern Europe, and specifically Latvia and Lithuania, so what's often known as the Litvak Jewish community. And what I would say if I didn't get that community reading is 3%, you're in the trace results region, low confidence, it could be possible, but you're also coming from a population group that's heavily descended from Iberia, and pretty much anyone that has an Iberian ancestry is often going to get some sort of small percentage of Jewish, just because of the history of conversion of Jews in Iberia to Catholicism over the hundreds of years, especially considering the Inquisition and well before that, because a lot of things like the Inquisition were happening in Iberia before the Inquisition happened. But even though we have all of that going on, the thing that really stands out is that community's part. And that is not a common thing to get, and more especially to have it be a Litvak connection. And what these communities usually come from is they are being discovered because Ancestry is looking at your DNA matches, looking at the family trees those DNA matches are supplying, the areas that those families are coming from, and then using that information, Ancestry basically figures out, based on you having a bunch of cousins that have this ancestry, that's what you're getting. So there's 2 possibilities of what could be happening. One is that it could be a false positive, and what's happening is that some recent relative of yours, maybe let's say you had a grandparent or a great-grandparent who had a sibling who married someone who is a Lithuanian Jew. They had a whole bunch of descendants, and a lot of them DNA tested, and now because of that, Ancestry sees, oh, you have a lot of genetic matches with Lithuanian Jewish ancestry, and so then they say you might have that as well as a community, just because a lot of your matches may have it. But it's not your ancestry, you're just connected to it because you had a great-grandparent with a sibling that married into that. So that's the first possibility. The second possibility is that it is a true positive, meaning that it's true, and basically you have some sort of recent ancestry in Litvak Jewish communities. And this is something that hopefully you would be able to figure out either through the paper trail or through your DNA matches, or a combination of both. Through the paper trail, it's just a matter of tracing out your family tree and trying to find somewhere in your tree where you'd expect to have that Jewish ancestry. Being that you only have 3%, I would assume that that 3% is from a recent ancestor because of this community. And at 3%, then you're dealing with about a third great grandparent, maybe a second, maybe a fourth, but more than likely a second or third great grandparent. So trace out your family tree as best possible to every single one of your third great grandparents and see, does anybody stand out as possibly being Jewish, or even just having such a vague background that maybe they are the one. The next thing is looking at your genetic matches. You're already on Ancestry, so go into the Ancestry filters and look for your matches that have Jewish ancestry, and more specifically, matches where they're tracing to Latvia and Lithuania. But see if you can find those matches. Hopefully you can find some close matches on that. Even more, see if you can figure out how those matches are related. So let's say that you find 4 or 5 matches that they're all Jewish, tracing to Lithuania, and you're able to then figure out that they're all coming from this same family. And they all descend from this second great grandparent who immigrated from someplace to America or some Puerto Rico or wherever. It is very likely, once you're able to figure something out like that, that you can then get a better idea of how you fit into that family. So even if you're only able to get 2 matches where you figure out how they're related, as long as it's not a sibling match or a parent child match, because then that's not really going to be as helpful. But if you figure out that, let's say, they're first cousins, well, if they're first cousins, then they share a set of grandparents, and whichever set of grandparents that they share, you know it's through those grandparents of theirs that you'll be able to find how you connect to their family. So then it's just basically a matter of figuring out where in their family tree to trace and figure out things. And then hopefully if you've traced enough in your family tree, you can maybe start to find some sort of correlation. So this really does stand out in the fact that you have the community there. And this is one of the things I often say about the DNA test and the admixture is the admixture is the least genealogically useful part of these DNA tests, but the most genealogically useful part of the admixture is when they have these community tabs. So you'll definitely have a lot more work cut out for you, but I think that you are onto something, and I think with enough genealogy, you might get a better idea of what's going on. And then one last suggestion I will put out there for you is that I would suggest researching into the Jewish communities of Puerto Rico, and more specifically, if you know that the majority of your family is coming from one area of Puerto Rico, so let's say it's Ponce, Puerto Rico, or something like that, and you go and you look into the Jewish community, you may start to find certain names that are connected to that Jewish community that are in your family tree that you might have not correlated to Jewish families, because not all Jewish families had surnames that people would expect as Jewish. But one thing that you'll want to make sure that you're utilizing as you do this research is the different tools available to understand how distantly related your genetic matches are. And to learn that, be sure to check out this video of mine right here. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It is completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GenieVlogger. I'm the Genie Vlogger. See you in my next video.